Again, folks, still got a few people still to join us. I'm just looking through the quiz results here. I'd like to show you the histogram, but the curve, but it's a bit of mucking around to screenshot it, and then I can't paste that directly. So instead, I'll just simply tell you, as I've put in the feed there of chart, that the average is 2/3, so 13 out of 20, 65%. And of course, it's the usual Waseda ping kitty, range from 1 out of 20 to close to full marks. Let me see, the highest, yeah, very close to full marks. So excellent. Very, very well done. I actually have it, I'm displaying it as a percentage here. So 90 to 95 band, there's a few people, 80 to 85%, 80 to 80, 85 to 90%. It's the usual very neat kind of bell curve. I can't screen share it without showing a couple of people's score, unfortunately, just above it. So any specific questions about answers there? I'm happy to interact, and if anyone thinks I've got it wrong, make the case, and I'll revisit it. Exam is super fresh in my mind because I finished it last night. So, no, everyone's kind of happy with it. Okay. There were a couple of questions there where people had to just engage with the particular examples, you know, and so there is a very important lesson here. I wanted to signal what I'm expecting from people in terms of engagement with the material. When I put examples there, don't just kind of, oh, look at it, okay. Use it as a prompt or a bit of a kikake to explore around it. You know, there's a very specific question there, you know, which I made brief reference to speaking online, you know, about the aesthetics of and the imagery, you know, of the snowboarding industry, that it's closer to street culture and it's skateboard culture, for example, surfing culture rather than skiing, even though, you know, you line up on the lift with the skiers, the surrounding culture is actually kind of remarkably different. Skiing is increasingly influenced by snowboarding. I mean, everything, even the design of skis have dramatically changed in response to the rise of snowboarding, the you know, wide float and long radial cuts and all the rest of it. You know, if you see your parents' skis, if they've still got them from the bubble, there are these long thin things that, you know, it's like riding on two huge chopsticks. They've just dramatically changed technically and whatnot. But the surrounding culture and the imagery and the branding still remains quite different. So of course you would get hints about that if you looked at some of the material I'd linked to, but you had to think more expansively about it. So use the examples not as the last stop, but as a kind of entree into things that you may not have paid attention to. You know, if there's an example and you've never heard about this, you know, this person before, do a quick Kensucker, you know, that wonderful power of digital interface of things where you can just simply right click on a name, look it up with Google or Yahoo or whatever, and expand it, okay? And we'll do this repeatedly. We'll see in relation to communication theory, for example, and how something can have cultural relevance, cultural and emotional meaning, even though a lot of people don't quite understand it. There's a very famous case with the song Don McLean and American Pie, and there's a video, 2 videos about it on the website. So if you don't know anything about the reference points there, Google it, you know, really have lots of curiosity, Korkishin, because that's one of the most powerful findings about people who do well in fields of creative endeavor, of business, that they want to understand and know everything, and they want to suck it all up like a sponge. And I myself remember as an undergraduate, primarily what I got from the academics who taught me, of course, it was a curriculum, but it was more the enthusiasm for things I knew nothing about, that I'd leave a classroom or a seminar, with my notebook, with a bunch of books and authors and whatnot. And I'd be racing over to the library, to grab some books or whatever. Most of the time, it was most interesting and most motivating when the professor had actually got off track and was doing what we'll see later on. One of the founders of IDEO, referred to as bird walks, starts to tell a story and remembers, oh, this and this and this, and they're jumping all over the place. They're the kind of people who will enrich you enormously because they're making the connections for different things and they're giving you lots of leads, and you explore those leads. And when you connect with people like that and have valuable conversations, so many unexpected positive things can grow from it. A final tip then too, on terms of, I want to say this really sensitively because I understand why people have this perspective. In terms of interacting with professors, there's a powerful lesson here. Some of you will have discovered this. The quickest way to be hated by your professor is when a professor is excitedly communicating something, showing a passion for something, and you go, excuse me, is this going to be on the exam? At that moment, you will be hated and despised, and hopefully the professor won't know your name. It's even worse to do on Zoom because then they do know your name. Because what it means is that you're being very short-term, calculative. What's the immediate payoff for this? If there's no immediate benefit to me, I don't want to know about this. And if someone has a passion for something, and you just have a highly instrumental response, you might as well say, yeah, whatever, okay? And that will kill it stone dead. So it's a university lesson, but it is a much broader lesson, okay? About allow yourself to be taken in interesting directions. We often say, enthusiasm is contagious. We often say that, but then I think people haven't met Waseda students. Some of them do. Many other people are much more kind of short-term and calculative. And the problem with, but I completely understand why people get that way. If you've gone through a process of juken, whether it's chugaku juken, koukou juken, daigaku juken, and whatnot, where you have an expansive curriculum in front of you in your school, whether it's your elementary school, your middle, your high school, but then to get through the gate into wherever you want to get, it's yon kamoku, san kamoku, go kamoku if you're aiming for Torah and you didn't get there and you came here instead, and wonderful to have you if you did. Okay, so you've only got a few fields and people just kind of focus very instrumentally on that. And even teachers direct you to do that. Parents direct you to do that. All the juku and everything direct you to do that. So that kind of short-term focus and the discipline that comes from it, you get very good habits and whatnot. But it's about mastering an existing field of knowledge for an existing goal. And the world is changing so incredibly rapidly these days with the dramatic acceleration of the destructive impact of technology. That the idea that it's like a heat no hitaru reira no ni hashiru no wa mo shorai se ammari nai ne. The world is changing so dramatically. Companies are in incredibly strong positions, are suddenly not. Whole industries are being disrupted, for example. And as we see now, just in the last couple of years, many people who kind of cautiously follow an existing career path, their incomes are really stagnating, and people are engaged in startups. New business opportunities are getting really rich really quickly. And so a lot of people are confronted with this horrible choice between this kind of stability and order that you've been well trained for and this kind of fluidity of opportunity. And it's very often the people who do the bird walk, who follow the bird walks, who take the indirect paths. They have the incidental connections with people that creates opportunities and leads them to a place they never would have expected to go. And in this sense, we must understand that being in a prestigious university such as Waseda that has brand cachet here in Japan, arguably is a curse, because it's a commodity that makes it quite easy to leverage to go and get a good job, and whatnot. But the danger is you then enter an organization and then you just kind of work up through the ranks. I had a wonderful conversation while waiting for my roast duck at the Hong Kong Chinese base in front of Waseda Station with a very bright Chinese guy. Who was a graduate of Seike, and he was Nineme for one of the major consulting firms. And as I said, well, so many students want to go to Konsarune, and so many students say to me, とりあえずコンサルに行って将来に自分のビジネスを作りたい。彼が大笑いした。And me laughed. He goes, yeah. Everyone says that. And then you go to Deloitte or one of the other big firms, and the vast majority of people, they don't go create their own business. They kind of stay in the system and they kind of they work up through it, okay? And it's a combination of being very busy, but also kind of secure, busy, and comfortable in a way. And it reminded me of a very famous theory about why the Chinese economy was world leading in technology 1,000 years ago, but then was overtaken by the West. And there was a scholar called Mark Elvin, and he referred to it as a low-level equilibrium trap. Which explained why China was 1,000 years ago much more prosperous than any other country in the world. But it was sufficiently prosperous to create institutions and entrance exam systems, the Confucian scholarly system, decent infrastructure, all of those kind of things. The only time that it broke down was when there was civil war. But effectively, people got comfortable and therefore weren't innovative. And in a funny kind of way, it was the civil wars, the disruption, the repeated conflicts that happened in Europe that created the space for entrepreneurship. And later on, of course, imperialism and discovering the new world, where the rules were not established, and people would meet diverse people in often difficult contexts and would be creative together. So there's some really powerful lessons here about how we see, where we look to the sources of knowledge. And if we get too hung up on thinking that we've got a mental map of figured out how the world works, it is potentially a huge trap, because we simply won't see opportunity. And I will come back to that and repeatedly when we're talking about communications. Because of course, if you want to go into business for yourself, not just the pitch of the business idea when you've got it, but just the day-to-day interaction with a vast array of people, leading to these perhaps fortuitous meetings that create business opportunities, finance opportunities, market opportunities, all those kind of things. Okay, now if there's no more questions about the quiz, I will very briefly go through the stuff that I didn't have time to cover last week. That is the legal context of corporate communications. But I also want to highlight a really fundamental point, that actually the legal foundation of business around contract law is actually predicated on a communicative act in the Anglo-American world, and contract law out of the UK, out of England originally, and Scotland, and then in the US and so many other places, is the default legal foundation for international business. So people who transact between countries that are not even the Anglo-American legal tradition. It's someone contracting in Korea to buy lithium from a mine in Latin America, for example. Typically, the jurisdiction for a dispute will be a place like London or another place where effectively English contract law applies. So we need to have a feel for this. But also we need to understand that there is in terms of the practice of corporate communications, there's the huge imperative in terms of timeliness and social media and a shortened media cycle. But equally weighting against that is an ever stricter concern with compliance. And we need to look at those two things as forces contending day to day in an organization. And so let me pull up those slides. You've got them, but I'll briefly speak to them. I'm conscious, by the way, that the recordings of the class, when I've been showing the running it from the PDF, that I had this little video of myself and whoever else happens to be showing beneath me at the side, and the way the video capture has been happening is effectively it's been kind of chopped off. Anyway. So basic ethics of communication. This is a key point that I want to emphasize here, and we will come back in our conclusions, a critical finishing point, because arguably that in a liberal society, the most fundamental skill you need is a communicative skill to convince other people to freely associate with you and lend support to the realization of your own personal projects, your own conception of the good. It also stems from that, the notion that one of the highest ethical imperatives is to be honest in your dealing with other people. Sounds commonsensical, right? But this must start with an honest understanding of yourself. So as I say in the slides, in liberal societies marked by pursuit of one's private conception of the good and free association with others, you have an ethical imperative to disclosure to other parties. Now, this is a thoroughly modern phenomena. The vast majority of people in the past, until the recent past, and many people in the world still today, do not have a free choice over their career, over the way they spend their free time, over who they marry. You know, their parents decide, the community decide, for example. This also is why, and there were hints on it in the opening discussion in the course, and we'll talk a lot about it in one of the later weeks with John Sensei from Sophia. This notion of authenticity, personal authenticity, is a thoroughly modern notion. Still, in fact, probably the majority of people in the world who do not have a free choice over their career, their marriage, the way they spend their days, you know, agonizing about personal authenticity is completely and utterly meaningless. If anyone watches the Tiger drama, focusing on Shibusawa Eiichi, I watched it on Sunday night. The final scene there, if anyone's watching it, was that Eiichi begs his father to release him from the family bonds because he wants to go off and kill foreigners in Yokohama as part of Son no Joy. Eventually changes his mind and becomes a primary, one of the lead advocates in the Meiji period for international trade and engagement, and you know, funded educational foundations and whatnot. But like so many others, he was caught up in his time. He actually, you know, the conclusion to the drama there was the father said, well, you know, I've lived as Hyakusho-san, as a farmer. That was my fate. But you're free to live the way you want to live, and off you go. Now, there would have been very few people, even in Bakumatsu, Edo, Japan, who thought like that would have actually have been, to a remarkable degree, an alien notion. What you did was determined by your social circumstances, okay? And there's a very famous book about sincerity versus authenticity, or Trilling, which talks about this, that the historical notion of sincerity was really about trying to close the gap between your inner feelings and your social obligations. And until the modern era, what this meant was not that you changed society, your place in society, to reconcile it to your own feelings, but rather you managed your own feelings to accept your social position. And many people in many societies still today, even, you know, well-educated people. I've had 2 students, brilliant students from abroad, educated at Waseda, A+ GPAs, 2 women, both of whom wanted to go to graduate school, and fathers had decided, no, it's time for you to marry, and they didn't go on to graduate school, and they accepted their fate. And I said, this is the context in which I live, and my struggle is merely to adjust my own expectations, my own identity, my own self-narrative to these external constraints, okay? So the idea that you would actually remove yourself from those constraints or try and change them directly by changing the family dynamic or the social structure is a thoroughly modern notion. Now, once we get to that modern state where we act based on our own values, first of all, the issue arises, well, where do we get our values from? Are they really our own values? Are these the values that we've just picked up on Facebook? You know, one of the questions there was about my own book chapter there, and the correct answer, by the way, was that social media can work for the improvement of tastes if people with taste actively use social media. So social media is only as good as the quality of your social media friends, so who you follow, okay? If you follow Donald Trump, you do your head in. You know, if you follow sensible people, you're more likely to stay or become sensible. So, you know, effectively, we get our values from our social context, but we are also free to mine an enormous array of influences and find our own unique, distinctive voice. Is there a degree of arbitrariness to it? Well, very famously, Nietzsche said, and we'll talk about this later on, there was a kind of a pragmatic imperative, so that people knew what they were dealing with you, was that there is this arbitrariness to yourself, but decide on your persona, decide on your values, decide on your position. You know, it's kind of arbitrary and random. Pick it and pick something and stick to it, and then kind of realize it. Okay, which sounds quite cynical, and that's why he never used the discourse of authenticity. But let's assume you have a very strong sense of what you are. And you need or would like other people to collaborate to help you achieve your sense of the good. Clearly, the ethical imperative is to communicate yourself to others. You know, it's not a good thing to marry someone because they've got high status, high income, or whatever, if you have no desire to be faithful to that person. Or if if you know you're gay, but you marry for cynical reasons. Now, historically, vast majority of people had absolutely no choice in that. They couldn't be true to their own sexuality. But society, even just only the last decade, and arguably the last only 3-4 years in Japan, has become much more accepting of people actually being true to themselves in terms of their gender preference and their gender identity. So self-awareness is a critical starting point, okay? So self-awareness becomes a powerful moral imperative to interrogate yourself so that you can therefore be honest in your communicative acts in a liberal society. You know, for example, it's a really bad thing to do to agree to work with someone else for a startup business when you fully intend to go to graduate school in a year's time, and you're thinking, well, if I've been involved in a startup, it'll make my CV look good, and it'll help me to get into an MBA program. But the poor person you've started the business with suddenly loses their business partner, and the venture will fail. Okay, so being really honest about your intentions. And one thing I want to say really, really straight is Countless times I see too many Waseda students who say whatever that they think people want to hear. Okay, I have this problem sometimes when people apply for Zemi, they declare a great interest in creative industries because they want to get into my Zemi because they hear I'm not a fascist or whatever. Okay, then they get into Zemi and then the story completely changes. Okay, suddenly they want to go into finance. I'm saying, okay, so you want to do finance for, you know, creative industries? No, no, I just want to be a bond trader. It's like, but you said, oh, I changed my mind. Okay. There is this very short-termist, tactical play people tell them what they want to hear element in our modern culture. Increasingly, this will catch up with you. I think you can get away with this to some degree in the Japanese context because we still don't very much rely on things like references. In Western society, where you don't get through any gate without an impressive set of references, you burn bridges if you're dishonest with people. You won't get references, and the absence of references becomes really powerful information. Someone comes for, you know, for a job interview, you've got no references from current colleagues. We understand maybe not from your current boss, but current colleagues. Why no references? You've got something to hide. The absence of information becomes absolutely damning. So you have to be really honest in your dealing with people. Okay. Now, of course, we all know anyone who takes off their wedding ring and gets themselves into a new relationship and says, I didn't tell you I was married and 3 kids. Oh, must have forgot to tell you that. Is not very credible. And we know it's not a very moral thing to do. Now, so why is this so fundamental? Well, we're in the primacy of the individual, okay? The individual is sovereign, and the individual's visions and tastes and aspirations are effectively sovereign. But of course, we are subject to state authority as well. Historically, the state was not an institutional arrangement so much as a very powerful individual or network of individuals or family or whatever, who could muster the means of violence to impose their will on others, okay? So effectively, the state or the monarchy or whatever was under no obligation to communicate its intentions or conditions to those affected by it. You know, the famous, I think it was Louis XIV, was Louis XIV. There was a philosophical discussion about the law, and he said, "Le loi, c'est moi." The law, that's me. Okay. Now, any mafia boss today kind of gets this. Okay. But my 3-year-old daughter got this when I was giving her a small talking to about being responsible. She just went, "Daddy, tell it to the hand." Just brazen contempt, knowing, yeah, I don't have to listen to you. I've got it completely kind of, you know, figured out my relative position, and you really can't make me do this. It's pretty scary when you're a 3-year-old figured it out. Nothing ever changed. Okay. So historically, you know, this was the state authorities' position, and you will still see this in so many contexts. One of the most bizarre experiences I've ever had with a student here at Waseda, a guy walked into my office without even knocking. The door was open, but he just walked in, walked up, stood in front of my desk. I knew he was. I knew he hadn't submitted his essay on time, and he said, "We need to negotiate." I'm like, "We need to negotiate." I'm like, "We need to negotiate." I have nothing I want that I can take from you. Okay, so you cannot give me anything. So there is no negotiation. All you can do is beg for mercy, okay? Because you have nothing that I can take, okay? And I wouldn't anyway on principle. So all you can do is beg. You know, the old joke, I'm sure you all did this as kids. You said, you know, beg, get out, act like the dog you are, you know, inflict the humiliation on people when they've got no position. My brother used to do that all the time when he was serving dinner or whatever. My younger brother used to wind me up and set me off by doing this. So historically, It was pronouncement because position of authority was this. They were could do this. They had authority. So in the English legal tradition, for example, what do we see is that laws are just simply announced. And the fact that they're announced means you've got to follow them. So we still talk about the law being gazetted, so published in an official gazette. Okay. Once it's been announced, there is this communicative endeavor. You know, you're not second guessing the mind of the king or the queen. The authority declares a position, and then people are bound by it. And there's a tradition of this in the Bakufu and whatnot in Japan as well. You know, the tradition of the town crier in England was someone who would walk around in villages and simply hear ye, hear ye, hear ye, very famously and parodied all the time, and would just simply declare an announcement from the king, and everyone at the time when most people weren't literate, they were simply told, and therefore they had to follow the law. Okay, so ignorance of the law does not stand as a defense against prosecution for breach of it. I didn't know will get you absolutely nowhere in any court. Okay, public law is not consensual. Okay, the state has a monopoly on the means of violence. But now we turn to the vast field of contract law. If anyone goes on to law school, you will discover, particularly if you're in the English tradition, this is where your law education kind of starts and finishes. I know in the Australian context, in the UK is similar. Law is this huge one-year course that takes up between a quarter to 1/3 of your first year of, so a contract takes up a quarter to 1/3 of your studies in the first year. And the textbook is kind of this thick, okay? And a large proportion of contract law, this is about parties who freely come together, bind themselves to each other for mutual benefit, and then create obligations, of course, which can then be enforced in the court of law. This is the foundation of capitalist societies, okay? So contract is absolutely critical. So one of the key concepts is in law, offer and acceptance. What constitutes an offer? What constitutes acceptance? And so huge case law specifying this. You know, really elementary things. You drive into a car park, you take a parking ticket, and on the back of the parking ticket are all written in tiny, tiny, tiny print saying that the operator of the car park takes no responsibility whatsoever for your death or your car being damaged or whatever. Normally they have a sign hanging over the top as well, which is impossible to read. So is that actually legally enforceable? Very often it's not. If it was not possible for you to have duly consented by your free will. So if there's any question of coercion. So for example, holding a gun to someone's head and having them sign a contract, on contract law, it's very clear that that contract is voidable if you can prove that you are subject to duress, okay? Duress is a critical word. So, you know, the, do you love me? Do you love me? Oh, yes. Okay. You can plead duress, okay, under English contract law that you were forced to say it, okay? I'm not saying you're responsible, that doesn't give you a free pass to be immoral subsequently, okay? So effectively, for a binding contractual arrangement to stand, there must be a clear communication of offer and acceptance, and it must be evidenced. And so there's a whole lot of interesting things about actually when does an offer stand? There's a huge case law about what happens if someone accidentally sends a offer or a contract with the wrong price on it. You know, if you drop it in a post box and then you go, damn, I put an extra 0 on it, and you ring up and saying, hey, tear that up when it arrives, okay? So in different legal contexts, that's treated with differently. Is the offer when it's received, is the offer when it's sent? So you'll see in the Japanese case too, there's a very strong alertness to this. So you'll see hichaku, for example, you know, required to arrive by a certain time, okay? Well, what happens if there's a flood? What happens if the post office, you know, can't deliver it on time, and all of those kinds of things? In reality, a lot of what happens in terms of negotiation is what's been referred to by legal scholars as bargaining in the shadow of the law. Okay, that yeah, some people have contracts that maybe create obligations, but in reality, to enforce those contracts are costly. You have to go to court. That's very expensive. It's very drawn out. So some people quite ruthlessly make lowball offers. They say, yeah, I kind of contracted to pay you $10,000, but it's going to cost you $20,000 to actually sue me to make you pay $10,000. So how about I give you a packet of bubblegum instead? People say, you bastard, but you're right. Okay, give me the bubblegum. This is Donald Trump. Donald Trump's, one of his key ways of doing business was to routinely sign contracts that he had no intention of upholding. For him, a contract was always discounted by the costs of enforcing it. And someone actually calculated that he has had more lawsuits than every single fictional lawsuit or legal case in every American television courtroom drama created since the invention of television. And it's a huge genre in America. You know, people love to watch these kind of courtroom drama shows and whatnot. So someone calculated that if you added up all the episodes of courtroom drama shows in America, that Donald Trump's actually had more lawsuits, hundreds. I think it was like 500 or something like that. So be very wary that just because you've got a contract that you think you're actually protected. But there are some of the key legal principles that we need to understand, because of course our judgment about what is good behavior is mirrors not only what's required by law, but then broader expectations that even when not enforced strictly in a court of law, you should be upholding this. So things like duty of disclosure. That you in the English contract law, you have a requirement to disclose relevant information that might lead another party to not agree to something. So actively hiding bad information about something when you sell it, for example, even when you're selling a company, when you're making floating a new business and doing an IPO, for example, all of these things can lead to legal conflicts. So in English contract law, for example, restrictions on misleading conduct, all grounds for voiding the contract. So what this means is that when sales teams are selling things, it's incredibly important that the sales team don't oversell the product because the contract can be voided. And as communications become increasingly digital, as we use Zoom and Zoom meetings are recorded, when we use email, social media, all of these things and hybrid versions such as Slack, then it's so much easier to find a trace of communications which can have huge financial implications. A contract may be voided. I know the case of a friend who is a billionaire founder of a hedge fund. His ex-wife is Japanese, and he went through a very contested divorce. As when you're a billionaire and you're getting a divorce, it's normally contested because the money involved. Okay, and it turned out because his wife sent one message which said, "I never want to live in Hong Kong. I want to stay in Japan." He calculated that saved him literally hundreds of millions of dollars, because it established that the divorce should be handled under Japanese law rather than the law that prevailed in Hong Kong, which was influenced by English law. So one text message cost his ex more money than all of us will probably ever have kind of put together. Okay. So I want to speak briefly, and I'm planning to take a break in a moment. Okay, so I'll zoom through this and we'll take a break. I said originally we might run on the regular class time, but I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that. So bear with me, but we'll do it pretty quickly. There is a fundamental tension between clever communications design, being creative, getting attention, and compliance. Okay, so regulating disclosure, this is ever growing in order to protect parties to make markets work. So the idea that we're all freely contracting parties, a fundamental notion in economic liberalism, and I discourage you from using the term neoliberal because that doesn't give us much information. But this market-based notion that effectively the world is a better place if you let people just freely contract amongst themselves. To some degree, that's true, to a significant degree. But actually, the state has gone a long way over centuries in creating the foundations upon which we actually negotiate with parties. So, you know, compelling mutual disclosure of relevant information. Indeed, legal processes normally there's a process of discovery where both sides are required to present the evidence they've got, for example, to speed up the decision-making process. So it's a critical thing. But even just in transactions, as I said before, contracts can be voided if someone has deliberately withheld relevant information. Okay, so it's efficient. If the state requires this right up front, it saves people investing enormous resources and seeking information the other party might have. The state can only go so far, though. One of the critical sources of information are actually reputational assessors. So rating agencies, for example, if anyone takes my economics and my enterprise and governance course, you can hear how this actually works in financial markets. There's some really basic problems. You know, adverse selection we talk about in economics. I'm not going to linger on this now. Many of you will have heard it before. It's just this simple point that, as I say here, with adverse selection, it means that riskier clients hide negative information about themselves. You know, we hide bad stuff about ourselves and we present good stuff, which means that if you're selling any product that takes a risk of someone, insurance or anything like that, or even just employing someone, marrying them, for God forbid, then there is this inherent information asymmetry problem that people will hide the bad about themselves and accentuate the good. Okay, so governments increasingly regulate for information disclosure and stock market listing processes. All of these kind of things are significant. Hi guys, sorry about that. My, for whatever reason, the iMac crashed for the first time in about 4 years. It's extraordinarily annoying. I always carry a backup laptop just in case this happens. But that's okay. Look, we've only got a few minutes left, so I think I'll run this off the laptop balanced on my knee, although it is kicking up again on the desktop. So I'll go in and I'll do a share to what I was showing there. And sound is going to be terrible, but maybe I'll move over to my, hang on. Okay, so I'll move over to my comfy chair. My apologies for this. The sound is going to be terrible now. It'll be a separate recording and I'll splice them together. So just need to find the file on this. You get to see a different angle. I'll show you my office in a second so you can see how I'm working this. Kind of a behind the scenes deal. All last semester, and I carried my laptop in here every single day, just fearing that one day this might happen to me. And the machine would take a while to boot up. So it's finally happened. Okay, that's my, you can see where I'm, that's my setup over there. So, and it's come back to life over there now, finally. I'll screen share. Okay, so back to perception. Okay, So these psychological effects, oh, by the way, I'll show so you can see. I do have a wonderful view over Shinjuku here. So in better times or by arrangement, you're very welcome to come by for consultation one-on-one in my office, and you can get comfortable here too. So these various effects that Kahneman and Tversky have explored look at how we have systematic biases which override our pure reason. For example, it's very, very clear that if people are gambling and if they're losing, their risk profile shifts because people have a huge psychological preference for getting back to, if not positive, then not negative. So people don't like to lose. So you may have a very hard-headed calculus, betting on the horses or blackjack, or the casino, or whatever. But this is the downward spiral of losses that people fall into, that people become more reckless in order to try and just get back to their starting point. And they always say, it's kind of, to quote 50 Cent, get rich or die trying, okay? I'm going to boldly kind of bet the remains to try and get back to where I am. And they always tell themselves, and I'm never going to gamble again, okay? So cutting your losses, and here we need a simple shorthand. Cut your losses is a very important tactic for stopping yourself doing these kind of things. There are so many other interesting things. The salience effect. We fear things, threats that we've recently heard about, for example. And some things have greater salience than other. Risk assessors and Kahneman himself explained, for example, the chance of dying in a terrorist attack in the United States are incredibly slight. But opinion polls showed that an astonishing proportion of Americans, particularly after 9/11, thought that there was a relatively high chance that one of their relatives or friends would be killed in a terrorist attack. Yet the numbers showed very clearly that the far greater danger was slipping over in the bathtub, hitting your head and dying than being a victim of a terrorist attack. But we never had President Bush at the time, declaring war on television against bathtub deaths, for example. So some things naturally are more salient. Some things are more vivid and therefore linger long in our imagination, and we give excessive weight to them, contrary to our kind of rational self-narrative. So a key thing is we need to understand all of those factors, and very often how people take advantage of those systematic cognitive biases to rip us off. So I strongly suggest you engage with Kahneman's work to protect yourself there. As for designing corporate communications, we need to understand that there's going to be audience resistance and manipulation. And some of the most interesting work on communication design is about how we actually nudge people to better behavior, knowing that people don't want to be told what to do. But if the message is properly framed, you can kind of nudge people towards better behavior so that they themselves want to move in that direction. I think this is very important to keep in mind if you're the kind of the activist person, someone who wants to change the world. First of all, yelling at people rarely ever changes the world. Getting angry at people doesn't really change. One of my rules of thumb is you really can change the world if you don't mind getting no credit for it. Let other people think they had the idea. And that's why we'll talk about redescription, and expanding the range of people's ethical concern is a powerful technique, okay? Now, just in terms of how we can nudge people with communication sometimes, but if we can't really force people to do things which are contrary to their instincts, and I've just got a particular example here. You see this in the subway very often, signs telling you where to go up, walk up or, walk down. Right at Waseda station there is this striking one which just causes utter confusion for the very simple reason it encourages people to go up on the right side rather than the left side of the stairs. And a number of stations have this in Tokyo. And it seems the only people who actually can follow this and feel comfortable with it are people who come from Kansai, because Japan is this quirky thing where people were on a different side based on Kansai or Kanto, okay? And so you end up with a situation where if you actually follow the instructions, you run face-to-face to people, okay? So one of the implications here is you can't just randomly tell people, even if there's a strong rational reason, to change well-ingrained behavior. JR now for a few years has been trying to tell people, do not stand on the left-hand side of the escalator going up to let people to pass. It's more efficient if you stand next to a stranger and ride the escalator together, ride it, don't walk, okay? And don't care about people behind you who may be rushing. Now, I can't do that. I haven't met many people who can do that other than someone who's generally thought to be Kuki-Ominai George Amaniatsu, okay? It's one of those classic instances of, in theory, yeah, it might be more efficient, but in practice, it runs so contrary to basic behavioral instincts. And now looking at our time, sorry with a crash there, we're a bit behind and no time to interact anyway, because I've kind of overfilled this again. This is our critical checklist. We're going to come to this repeatedly throughout the semester. I've just kind of color coded a little bit. This will be our checklist for effective message attributes. Resonance. Does it at an emotional or a rational level resonate, connect with the target audience? Does it do it in a timely way? There's an old French expression about thinking of a great response to someone who's insulted you as you're descending the stairs, descending the stairs as you're leaving the party. So you want the right message at the right time. Another thing is we need a resilient message, that the message should stick. It shouldn't be easily manipulated. We have sort of some fail examples where it could be clearly manipulated. The Qantas one with Qantas Luxury, for example, was just so easily taken advantage of people who wanted to play a prank. The message has to cohere across all the different communications channels. It has to be perceived as authentically motivated, authentic in its intent, an authentic communication effort by the person who's in, or the organization who's engaged in it. It can't be easily discounted. Now, it also needs an element of originality. It needs a distinctive signature of the sender. And does it reinforce a particular brand personality? And then finally, is it appropriate? Is it aligned with the ethical norms of the target audience and all the other stakeholders? Okay. You may choose to offend other stakeholders and in return win a high level of emotional engagement with your particular target audience. That's okay if you can offend those other people and you don't mind losing them, okay? But if you get such a backlash that effectively your television commercials pulled, for example, or social media platforms won't accept your content, then you can lose access to the channel. So this kind of checklist will be able to apply in so many different ways. So I've got a little task, and I'll remind you of this again with a message. Over the Golden Week break, I'd like you to think about COVID communications, what you're seeing from the government, what you're seeing from Tokyo, and what you've seen from Waseda, and think in terms of COVID communications against these criteria. And up until now, I'm sorry, the class has been very one way. It hasn't been very kind of interactive, except for people who stay back for a chat. So after the break, I want us to be more interactive, and we'll go into breakout groups as well. As for the stuff on the communications theory, you've got the set of slides, you've got the 2 videos there, and there's a very heavy going reading. It's not compulsory, but there are a very good map of the communications as a field and the different approaches. So I'd suggest you do a dive into it and gain some familiarity with it. Now, After the break, we'll be moving on to the discussion of design thinking. And this is going to be a key part of the course. And I think in terms of learning a broader approach, theory, and whatever, this is something you can apply to so many aspects of life. And also it's a really good thing to sell yourself with through shukatsu. So there'll be a couple of assigned readings associated with the design thinking, lightweight readings. They're designed for people for ordinary people to engage with and take design thinking and apply. Some that's coming out of the D School in Stanford, and another very famous text that I'll offer an explanation of. So our next quiz will center more on your understanding of, first of all, the communications theory. So you'll need to engage with the material seriously there. And then on design thinking. And I'll write a short message which summarizes those points. Okay, so we end up a bit over time with the crash there. I'm truly sorry about that. I'll stop the share here, and I'll hang about here if anyone wants to ask questions or whatever. I'm kind of flexible. I'm in my comfortable chair now by accident. So thank you very much. Stay healthy and happy over the Golden Week break. Of course, be sensible, but you're sick of being told that. Okay. The people who will be sensible will be anyway, and the people who won't be will do moritsu hampatsu, like the guy when I told to put a mask on the campus, and he screamed at me, and I thought, "Oh no, you are truly insane." So I just walked, but then he ran away, which is pretty weird. So yeah, the crazy ones are crazy, and the sensible people are sensible. And short of turning around and giving a fine to people, I think we're probably at the limits of communicative impact this far into a pandemic. But that's something I'm keen to hear your opinions on after the break. So yeah, beautiful weather, crappy pandemic. Try and make something of it in a healthy way. So thanks very much, guys. And thank you for your patience with this crash here. Cheers.